Most people assume that if time travel were real, it would be obvious. There would be machines, announcements, unmistakable proof. Something dramatic enough that it could not be ignored. But history rarely works that way. Some of the most unsettling anomalies do not arrive with spectacle. They surface quietly, inside ordinary moments, embedded in records that were never meant to raise questions beyond their original purpose. And sometimes, those questions only appear decades later, when someone notices that a detail does not fit. In the early spring of 1989, a routine incident report was filed at a regional transportation office in northern England. At the time, it drew no attention. The report described a pedestrian collision involving a man who appeared disoriented, dressed in outdated clothing, and unable to provide consistent personal information. The man was taken to a nearby hospital for evaluation. No crime had occurred. No one was injured. The paperwork was completed and archived. For years, that was the end of the story. What makes this incident unusual is not what happened that day, but what was discovered later, when a junior records analyst was tasked with digitizing old files and noticed something that should not have been possible. The man identified himself as Daniel Mercer. He claimed to be 38 years old. He spoke clearly, without signs of intoxication or distress, yet appeared confused by his surroundings. According to the report, he repeatedly asked where the factories had gone. He was particularly disturbed by passing vehicles, which he described as silent and wrong. At the time, medical staff attributed his behavior to shock or a psychological episode. What was not reasonable was his identification. Daniel provided an address that no longer existed. He provided a phone number with too few digits. He carried coins that were no longer in circulation, but the coins showed minimal wear, as if they had been minted recently and never handled. Then the analyst found the employment reference. Daniel claimed he worked as a maintenance supervisor at a power station that had been decommissioned in 1957. He described specific internal layouts that were never made public. When hospital staff attempted to verify his employment, the records did not exist. Many employment records from the mid-20th century were incomplete or lost. The file would likely have remained unremarkable if not for one final detail. Daniel stated that the date was April 17, 1954, not as a guess, not as confusion. He insisted on it. He corrected staff repeatedly. When shown a newspaper, he accused them of staging it. When told the year was 1989, he reportedly fell silent for several minutes before asking a single question: "How long was I gone?" The incident was classified as a psychiatric case. Daniel was transferred to a long-term care facility. Within weeks, he stopped asking questions. Within months, he stopped speaking almost entirely. 2 years later, he died of natural causes. No autopsy was performed. The file was closed. For decades, nothing about this story stood out, until the digitization process revealed something that should not have existed. Attached to the original incident report was a photocopy of a handwritten maintenance log. The log was dated March 1954 and bore Daniel Mercer's signature. It described a minor pressure anomaly at the power station. What drew attention was not the handwriting, which matched Daniel's later hospital forms, but the technical language used in the report. The log referenced a safety protocol that, according to official documentation, was not introduced until 1971. At first, the analyst assumed a cataloging error. These happen frequently in archival work. Documents are misfiled, dates are misread, context is lost. But when the original paper record was retrieved from storage, the date was clear. The ink was consistent with mid-century formulations. Independent testing confirmed this. The log should not have contained that protocol reference. There are only a few explanations for such a discrepancy. Either the protocol existed earlier than officially recorded, which would imply a significant error in industrial safety history, or the document was altered later. But forensic analysis found no evidence of modification. The handwriting was original. The ink showed uniform aging. There were no additions, no overwriting, no inconsistencies. That left a third explanation, one that made everyone involved increasingly uncomfortable: that Daniel Mercer wrote the log at a time when he had knowledge that should not have been available. This alone would not justify extraordinary conclusions. History is full of errors, anomalies, and coincidences, but the deeper researchers went, the more inconsistencies they found. Archived personnel rosters from the power station listed Daniel Mercer as an employee between 1952 and 1954. His file ended abruptly. The termination reason was listed as absence. No explanation, no disciplinary notes, just absence. In April 1954, his name disappeared from all records. That date matched Daniel's own claim. No missing person report was ever filed. In the 1950s, people did disappear. Records were not centralized. Families relocated. Communication was slower. It is possible that Daniel simply vanished and no one asked questions, but that does not explain his reappearance 35 years later, with no signs of aging beyond his stated age. Hospital photographs taken in 1989 show a man who looks consistent with someone in his late 30s, not someone approaching 70. Facial analysis performed decades later compared these photographs with a factory ID badge found in a separate archive. The badge was dated 1953. The faces matched with a degree of similarity that exceeded normal expectations, accounting for lighting and image quality. If the photographs are accurate, Daniel Mercer aged less than 2 years over a period of 35. That alone does not prove anything. Photographs can be misleading, but it raises a question that cannot be dismissed easily. Some researchers have suggested psychological explanations: dissociative identity disorders, false memory implantation, long-term institutionalization followed by misidentification. But none of these adequately account for the physical evidence, the technical knowledge embedded in the maintenance log, or the consistent aging discrepancy. Others have proposed bureaucratic explanations: that Daniel was part of an unrecorded government experiment, that records were intentionally altered or lost, that the incident was quietly classified. This explanation is often used because it feels safer. It keeps events within known human systems, but there is no evidence supporting it. No declassified files, no corroborating testimonies, nothing that suggests official involvement. Then there are those who focus on location. The power station where Daniel worked was built over a region known for unusual electromagnetic readings. Geological surveys conducted decades later revealed localized anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field. These anomalies were never considered dangerous. They did not interfere with equipment. They did not affect navigation, but they existed. Some physicists theorize that under extremely specific conditions, interactions between magnetic fields, water tables, and atmospheric pressure could produce localized temporal distortions. Not time travel as depicted in fiction, but brief disruptions in how time is experienced. A kind of temporal displacement, where an individual might exit a moment and re-enter at a different point along the timeline. This theory is controversial. It has never been experimentally confirmed, but it is not impossible under current models of space-time. Time, after all, is not as rigid as once believed. At relativistic scales, it behaves in ways that challenge intuition. Under certain conditions, it can slow, stretch, and distort. What if Daniel Mercer encountered such a condition accidentally? According to his own account, the incident occurred during routine maintenance. He described a sudden pressure change, a sensation of vertigo, and an overwhelming sound he compared to metal vibrating under strain. The log describes the same anomaly moments before his disappearance. If Daniel experienced a localized temporal displacement, He may not have traveled through time intentionally. He may not have traveled through space at all. He may have simply stepped out of one moment and into another. For him, minutes passed. For the world, decades did. This interpretation raises uncomfortable implications. If such events are possible, even rarely, then history may contain more gaps than we realize. People who disappeared without explanation. Stories dismissed as delusion or coincidence. Daniel Mercer's case is unsettling, not because it proves time travel, but because it resists every simple explanation. It exists in a space between disciplines, too technical for folklore, too strange for bureaucracy, too documented to dismiss entirely. After the digitization project concluded, the analyst attempted to escalate the findings. Internal memos show that supervisors advised against further investigation, not because of secrecy, but because of uncertainty. There was no framework for handling such a case, no department responsible for anomalies that fell between history, physics, and psychology. The file was archived again, digitally this time, labeled and stored, but the questions did not disappear. If Daniel Mercer truly experienced a temporal displacement, why him? Why that location? Why that moment? And perhaps most troubling of all, why did it not happen again in any documented way? Unless it did. Unless similar cases exist, scattered across decades, misfiled under different explanations, waiting for someone to notice the pattern. And if that boundary can be crossed accidentally, then the history we record may be missing people who simply stepped out of it, not through intention, not through machines, but through moments we were never taught to look for. And if that is true, then Daniel Mercer's story is not about time travel at all. It is about vulnerability, about how fragile our understanding of time may be, and about how easily someone could vanish from one era and appear in another, not as a traveler, but as an accident. If such events occurred once, they could occur again, and the next time we might not notice at all. For a long time after Daniel Mercer's file was re-archived, nothing more was done with it. There was no official follow-up, no inquiry committee, no attempt to replicate or explain what might have happened. The reason was simple. Institutions are built to handle defined problems. This was not one of them. It was not a crime. It was not a medical emergency. It was not a technical failure. It was an anomaly without a category. But anomalies do not disappear simply because they are ignored. Several years after the digitization process, an independent researcher studying historical disappearance cases requested access to transportation and employment records from the same region and time period. The request was broad, covering dozens of years and hundreds of minor incidents. The goal was not to find evidence of time travel, but to study patterns in occupational disappearances near industrial sites. Daniel Mercer's name surfaced again. What the researcher noticed was subtle. In the decade between 1948 and 1958, there were 5 documented cases of workers who vanished during routine duties at facilities located within a narrow geographic corridor. All were classified differently. One was presumed drowned. Another was listed as a voluntary abandonment. A third was recorded as an administrative error. None were investigated deeply. None resulted in criminal proceedings. All 5 sites shared one feature. They were located near regions later identified as having unusual geomagnetic properties. This did not prove anything. Correlation is not causation, but it suggested that Daniel's case might not be entirely isolated. One of those 5 cases involved a railway signal technician named Harold Finch. In 1951, Finch was reported missing after a night shift inspection near a switching junction. His tools were found neatly arranged beside the track. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no reports of a train passing through at the time. He was declared dead after 6 months. 32 years later, in 1983, a man matching Finch's description was arrested for trespassing on private rail property in a neighboring county. He claimed he was late for work and did not recognize the location. His fingerprints matched Finch's employment records. His age, according to medical examination, was estimated to be mid-30s. Finch would have been in his mid-60s. Unlike Daniel Mercer, Finch did not survive long enough for extensive documentation. He died in custody after suffering a stroke. His case was quietly settled as a case of mistaken identity compounded by mental illness. There are explanations for this. Fingerprint errors, though rare, do occur. Age estimation is imprecise. Records from the mid-20th century were not always reliable. Each individual discrepancy can be explained away. It is only when they are viewed together that discomfort sets in. Researchers who study temporal perception often emphasize that human beings are not well equipped to recognize disruptions in time. We experience time as continuous because our consciousness fills in gaps seamlessly. If time were interrupted for an individual, even briefly, they might not notice anything unusual. They might perceive the interruption as a moment of dizziness, confusion, or lost awareness. If that interruption resulted in displacement, the person would not experience travel. They would experience continuity, one moment here, the next moment elsewhere. This aligns with how Daniel Mercer described his experience. He did not describe movement. He did not describe transition. He described absence. Then standing on a familiar shore that no longer felt familiar. If time behaves like a field rather than a line, then it may be subject to interference. Fields can fluctuate. They can overlap. They can collapse under certain conditions. In physics, this is not speculative language. It is observed behavior. The question is whether such fluctuations can occur at scales large enough to affect a human being. Most physicists would say this is extraordinarily unlikely, but unlikely does not mean impossible. One of the reasons this subject remains controversial is because it challenges the assumption that time is passive. In everyday life, time feels immutable. It moves forward. We measure it. We rely on it. But modern physics does not describe time as a fixed backdrop. It describes time as something that interacts with matter, energy, and gravity. If time can be influenced by extreme conditions, then localized distortions might occur without intention or control, not as machines, not as portals, but as brief misalignments. And misalignments do not leave clear evidence. They leave confusion. They leave people who do not belong where they appear. They leave records that do not agree with each other. They leave questions that cannot be answered without stepping outside conventional explanations. This is why cases like Daniel Mercer's are so difficult to classify. They exist at the edges of multiple disciplines. History treats them as clerical anomalies. Medicine treats them as psychological episodes. Physics treats them as theoretical curiosities. No single field claims responsibility, which means no single field investigates them deeply. There is also another possibility, one that is rarely discussed openly because it unsettles even cautious researchers: the possibility that temporal displacement does not always result in dramatic reappearance. What if most cases end quietly? What if most people who experience such events never return? This idea is not meant to inspire fear. It is meant to acknowledge uncertainty. We already accept that the universe operates in ways we do not fully understand. Dark matter, quantum superposition, space-time curvature. These were once unthinkable concepts. Now they are foundational. Time may simply be another frontier where intuition lags behind reality. In the years following Daniel Mercer's reclassification, no further action was taken, but the file continues to circulate quietly among archivists, researchers, and analysts who encounter it unexpectedly. Every few years, someone notices the same inconsistencies. Every few years, someone asks the same questions. And every few years, the file is set aside again, not because it has been resolved, but because it has not. There is no dramatic ending to Daniel Mercer's story. No revelation, no confirmation, no refutation. There is only documentation, records that exist, records that contradict each other, records that should not align the way they do. And that may be the most unsettling part. If time travel were real in the way fiction portrays it, we would expect clarity, machines, evidence, purpose. But reality rarely operates with narrative convenience. It operates through fragments, margins, and errors. Daniel Mercer does not feel like a traveler. He feels like someone caught in between, someone who did not seek to leave his time, someone who did not understand where he had arrived, someone whose experience did not fit the frameworks available to explain it. If his case stands alone, it can be dismissed as an anomaly. If it is part of a pattern, it raises questions we are not prepared to answer. And patterns are difficult to see while they are forming. They only become visible in retrospect, which leads to a final consideration that makes many researchers uncomfortable. If temporal displacement can occur unintentionally, then it may not be limited to the past. It may not be limited to industrial sites. It may not be limited to rare conditions. It may be happening now, quietly, briefly, without witnesses, without records, and without anyone realizing that time, for a moment, did not behave the way it was supposed to. If that is the case, then Daniel Mercer's story is not a warning about technology or the future. It is a reminder of how little we truly understand about the present. And the most important question is not whether time travel exists. It is whether time itself is as stable as we assume. Because if it is not, then the boundary between past, present, and future may already be thinner than we think. And if someone were to cross it accidentally tomorrow, we might file it away under a familiar explanation and never realize what we had missed. Some questions don't come with clear answers. Some stories don't end. They linger. What matters is not what we think we know, but what we're willing to question. If this story made you pause, reflect, or look at the world a little differently, then it's done its job. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy thoughtful stories grounded in reality, curiosity, and careful analysis, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.